Built to last. There it is, right? Look at all the tabs you marked on it. We're excited, David Amerland, talk to you about a fantastic book. And great to have you here. And you've been a friend for, gosh, at least 10 years, if not longer.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing, right? When you think how quickly time flies, and I'm really thrilled to be here. You haven't met for such a long time now, so yeah, this is long overdue.
Well, this is a fantastically written and well done book. You had one that came out before this, kind of a wellness type, didn't you? A predecessor, I
That's it.
would
Yeah,
call.
I did it intentional. Yeah, which was it sort of touched a little bit upon health, physical health, but it was mostly mental and psychological. So this is kind of the next step in a way.
The mind, body, spirit, everything all in one. And I want to just say is anybody at any age. I mean, you have covered just about any age possible where you can do things. There, chair exercise, all types of stuff. Great references in the back, resources. This is like so you can keep boogieing in any technical field you're in or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, it's been good. It was a long time coming. It almost took 3 years to write, but yeah.
A black belt in at least 3 martial arts. Is that right?
I am. Yeah,
And
I've got a second degree black belt in one of them.
yeah, that's excellent. And then you went to a school named just like mine, St. Andrews.
Yeah, it did. Yes. Yeah. No,
Right.
I know.
But
Right.
on the other continent. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Exactly.
You have a background in science and technology, but one thing I've always known is your commitment to wellness. You know, I mean, that's been in the background, and that's been the thing that was in the background, and clearly a passion that you always had. Even though you produce some of the best books on semantic search, and of course, studying how to be effective in business with the sniper mind,
Yeah.
all these things, but it's all being effective in business, being effective in life. And this is what got you to jump into this book. That's what I want to know, because I know you've got a bunch of technical books to work on too.
Absolutely. Okay. There are two threads which basically make this book possible, and essentially the next possible step, the next step, inevitable step. Okay. What are those two threads? Essentially, everything I've written about, and on the surface, it looks compartmentalized and different, right? I've written about search and marketing and branding and trust and decision making and intentionality and now fitness. But all of those different arenas are about human behavior. It's what makes us tick. How do we behave in different contexts and why? My premise, my passion always is that if we better understand our own operating system, we become more effective human beings in every possible way for ourselves and for others. So that's the one connective thread. And the other thing is that essentially good health, and we're not talking about the visible aspects of fitness where you're lean and sort of muscled and everything, but just good health in your body and your mind are foundational. If you don't have that, you simply don't have the available energy to put into everything else. So you have to start with that as your first primary base, and then build from there. And how we achieve good health, although we are swimming in information about it, is exceedingly hard because we're complex and there are other things which stop us from achieving it, and we don't always understand them. So I was trying to unpack all this and bring it together in a very simple form. And I thought that if we manage to sort of better understand what's holding us back physically and mentally and psychologically, then in the complex world that we live now, which is becoming more complex by the day, we will be better positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that come our way and avoid the possible pitfalls.
And I agree. I see the interconnection with you of communication, relationship, technology. They're infused in our life, and they're becoming more and more every day.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I mean, you're swimming in it. I mean, you're doing so much work on AI, both you and Justin, and unpacking the layers, right, on a practical level. And the first question here is, how do we take advantage of something like that? Well, obviously, you need to feel good in yourself. You can't be fighting, struggling in your own body while you're attempting to essentially add an additional layer of learning in your mind. It's just very difficult.
Yeah, because learning. And as I wrote that article on distinctions, all these new distinctions, all these new learnings, more demands of our creativity is to stay competitive. Thinking takes more energy. This processor needs a lot of fuel to work properly, and to optimize it is
Yes.
critical. It's a machine that's biological, that needs resources to keep it working well. So that's why I think this ties into everything, including being competitive in AI.
Well, I tell you, you two are a tough act to follow on that. So you're leading me up. Uh, well, I'm just gonna say, I mean, one of my favorite things about you, David, is that you are no stranger to really taking the time to devote to really thinking. And it's not like you said, we're just awash with information today, not just fitness. And I know you wrote it so well in your book, in that many times we learn a lot of information, but what's the source? Where did we learn that from? And was it a good source? And not a good source on good and evil, but was it an informed source? And so that's one of our challenges. But, when I'm looking at this, if you were to just pick this book up and flip through it, it's already attractive enough, and it's got some good information, and it's got the diagrams. If you're sedentary or you just have a restricted schedule, it's got some really good graphics in there that you can just do with little to no weights. And so this is something, from the boardroom to the airport to just your living room on a tight schedule, anybody can get anything out of it just from those graphics alone. But to me, and a lot of what you say about this overall, mind, body, spirit really resonates with me, because this book is, for me, it's just as much a book about cognition and understanding yourself as it is about a holistic look at health and happiness, really. Because a healthier life, a more fulfilled life, a more aware life, you're going to be happier overall, because you're going to know yourself better and you're going to be in sync. And so, to lead up to one of my questions, one of the things I'm focusing on now and I'm researching in my spare time and even during the day is that of artificial intelligence and metacognition. And how can we learn to think, understand, and be aware of how we think, and use both techniques for that and AI to augment our awareness of ourselves. And so when you look at that, it could be something as simple as reflection is technically a technique to discover how you think. And so to take something like AI and use it to enhance that is already a step forward. But you put it so well in, if you don't really understand yourself and your limitations and what you're capable of, AI is in a way useless, because you don't even know how to use the tool. And I know it sounds cliche, but when you look at the Matrix, the story, the hero's journey of Neo, it wasn't until he really accepted himself and really opened his mind that he was able to do really anything miraculous. And so, I mean, there's a few things, as you can tell, yeah, with my book, there's as many sticky notes as pages. And there's one section in here that I really just want to get your inspiration. The paradox of motivation was something in this book that I read multiple times, and I really read that about 4 or 5 times before I even moved any further in the book, because it just captured me. Because for me, personally and professionally, how I've really come to know my style of thinking is everything is a process, from getting up in the morning to succeeding in life to picking the right workout routine. It's all a process. But the thing is, the process is useless without motivation. So I just really want to know, on motivation, talk a little bit, if you would, about that section of the book and really what led you to that framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something which I dwelt upon also in my previous book. We talk about motivational generally without truly understanding it. And then to confuse the matter, we also throw in willpower and discipline. And then it becomes really, really fudged in a gray area. And truly, if we strip off the semantics of the words themselves and the emotional baggage, motivational is essentially everything that we do has a neurochemical basis. It happens at the substrate of our body and our brain. And once it happens at that level, these days we have the tools to sort of analyze it a little bit, understand what it is that actually makes it up. So motivation at a neurochemical level essentially is the buildup of certain chemicals and certain ions in the brain, which once they reach a certain threshold, activate us to do something. And there's no halfway activation. Once the neurons fire, they fire 100%. So when we look at the chemicals and the ions and the sensations they produce, essentially motivation is going from a place where you don't feel so good all the time to a place where you feel better. So in a sense, we're motivated to act towards a better sense of who we are and a better situation for us in the future once we conceptualize that. What does that mean in our everyday basis, of course? What does it mean in our everyday life? Well, this is the hard part. We have two layers of operation. One is reactive and one is active. Reactive is what the environment will make us do. You wake up in the morning because the alarm went off. You need to get dressed because you can't go outside naked. You need to have something to eat. And then you need to get to a place of work because you're in your living. These are all things which are imposed by the structure of the external world. We don't actually have to think about them very much. So we do them automatically. And the internal part of us, where this is where motivation comes in, comes from the hard part of thinking why we do those things. Are they reflective of who we are? Are they reflective of where we want to go? Are they reflective of the values we hold, the beliefs that actually create a sense of who we are? And to do that work, to go inside ourselves and analyze, ask these questions, try to find the answer, peel back the layers, get a clearer grasp of why we do what we do. What does it really mean for us? That's the actual work that gives us the motivation to do amazing things, as opposed to just being reactive to our environment. The reason we don't always do it, and the reason we then fudge things by adding willpower and discipline, is we haven't got strong enough willpower, we haven't got sufficient discipline. I mean, these things are immaterial. If our motivation is strong enough, we create the willpower and discipline to do those things because we truly understand the value of what we're getting at. But for that to happen, we need to have the work on ourselves. We have to think, who am I? What do I want to be? What do I really mean to the world? What do I mean to myself? What impact do my actions have to me, to those around me? How do I synthesize all that into a picture of a person working in a 3D world and adding value to that world and getting value back from what he does or what she does?
That's right. And I know you and I have recently touched on this topic too, is, motivation in a way, something that kind of counteracts that is, dopamine. And dopamine is good, it has its place, but too much dopamine affects the frontal lobe, and that willpower is affected if all you're doing is chasing dopamine. And so in my search and what I'm doing with metacognition, this book really resonates because, again, we talked about recently, over the last year I've been on my own journey, and this is why I'm just soaking this book in one, health. I needed to be a healthier physical part of myself, but then two, one of my greatest joys in life is the ability to learn. I really enjoy learning. Anybody who meets me knows that I enjoy learning. And so I stumbled across some research that focused on learning and physical exertion, working out.
Mm.
And so what I tried over the year was, before I went to learn something, because anybody knows, even if you enjoy it, learning is hard. Sometimes
Yes.
it's uncomfortable. It's something new. You're pushing yourself. And of course, working out, physical fitness is pushing yourself. And so you would think, well, if you push yourself too much, you're not going to enjoy it. And at first it was hard. I would work out prior to learning something new. And what I found was I didn't feel complete in my day. Not in a negative sense, but if I didn't learn something and I didn't have that pairing, I just didn't feel complete at the end of the day. And when I did do it, say midday, I would, right before learning something or going into a meeting that was going to be educational, just a few push-ups, if anything, just to get the blood flowing. But I found when I did that, I felt better, I felt fulfilled, and my day just ended so much better. And you really touch on that. And I think it, I think that's kind of the core of what you're talking about, right? That fulfillment in that holistic approach, right?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought this example. And of course, for the viewers and the listeners, we've actually interacted on this subject on LinkedIn, and I brought in other examples. And I mean, you brought in your own example of how you do it, and I was blown away by it because I was thrilled. But there's also evidence. I think it was and I'm trying to remember the state now. It was Kansas, I think, where basically they implemented an approach called 0-hour PE. And what they did is that they asked their students in the school system statewide to do a little bit of physical exercise before going to class. And what they found from that is that first they got the fittest students in the state, but also their academic learning improved. And linking the two now will take a little bit of unpacking. Essentially putting the body through any kind of stress, and even if we do a few push-ups, we are removed from a homeostatic base level state. Our body is agitated, our stress levels go up, cortisol goes up, our stress hormones will be activated. And then in order for the body to return back into a base level state, the parasympathetic system kicks in. We breathe deeper. We begin to activate the neurochemicals necessary for us to return to a more balanced state. And because we've exerted ourselves, the state we return to now is a little bit more persistent. So you start your day or you start your learning. How? At a more stable, energetically sustainable base. So if you were to start before and you start to learn something, to go into the context of your particular situation, okay, you're thinking you're going to go somewhere, you're going to be the person visible in the situation, you need to bring value to the context, eyes are going to be on you. Understandably, anybody in that situation feels a certain sense of anxiety. You're being judged publicly. Everybody expects you to be the smartest person in the room. You need to be able to understand what you're trying to learn and actually understand it well enough so you can present it. Anxiety levels go up. In our brain, the activity that is then countenanced by this elevated anxiety is electrochemical responses, which do not give us optimal thinking. Other parts of your brain at the back of your mind are activated, whether you are doing okay or you're being judged. There's a constant sort of watcher looking at us and judging us and sort of giving us a feedback, even if we're not constantly aware of it. This takes resources away from what you're doing. You're not dialed in other words. You haven't got clarity of thinking. However, by doing this physical thing, you're already starting off from a really ideal place. Your anxiety levels are down, the confidence in yourself is good because you've done something physical, you have controlled your immediate situation, so you feel you're in control of what you're doing. That sense of control, which we achieve in our mind, like a thought almost, is again represented by a neurochemical state, which allows different parts of the brain to work together optimally and allows the body not to have elevated heartbeat, increased skin temperature, perhaps a little bit of sweat, which are signs of anxiety, signs of sort of uncertainty. And then the voice in our head, a negative voice which usually holds us back in terms of a performance, goes quiet. And then you perform to the best possible of your ability in that context. And that feels good because essentially it feels a lot less it takes a lot less effort to do that than it would otherwise. And that sort of optimized behavior is attended by the reward system, of course. We get serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline, which flow through our system and allow us to feel that we did something really well. So that reinforces the loop. So yeah, these are all the things that happen behind the scenes when you do something as simple as a few push-ups, learn something, go somewhere, and talk about it.
There's several things on this that interest me, and one is, in my experiences, if someone wants more motivation, they need to get in action to get the motivation. And that's, to me, aligned with this book. It doesn't just come to you thinking about it. You got to go move. You have to engage. You have to take a calculated risk. And I'd like you to talk about that because often I'm trying to think my way into motivation. And in my experience with human beings, it doesn't happen. You got to do
It does.
something and then the motivation comes.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's discuss motivation as an energetic mechanism. Essentially, it's a calculus which goes on ahead. That calculus calculates what is it we're trying to get, where are we now, and what is it going to cost us to get where we want to get to. So let's start with something intellectual. Let's say we take anybody off the street, we'll tell them, you need to be fit. They will 100% agree with that because there's no one who will disagree. You need to eat a little bit better. You need to sleep a little bit better. And they'll say, yeah, 1,000%. That's what I need. Great. Then we'll ask them, do you do it? And most people do not. And you say, why not? And the reason they do not, even though they totally understand the conceptual value of what we're talking about, is that in the calculus in their head, they haven't made the emotional connection which allows them to truly calculate what it means to them. So if you want to talk about motivation, whether it's in life, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in business, whether it's in training, as in keeping yourself healthy, whether it's in maintaining your nutrition or maintaining your sleep pattern so they actually work for you, the emotional connection is what is really necessary in order to calculate what you want to get to and what it will cost you to get there. And if the emotional connection is really strong, and I'll explain this, what I mean by the emotional connection in a practical example in a minute. If the emotional connection is there, then the calculus then works for us. So let's say we take somebody and we intellectually explain the elements of fitness and all the benefits, and they'll agree. We'll give them a plan, detailed plan about nutrition and sleep and exercise. And I can guarantee you, because we have the figures that happen every January, within a 4 to 6 week period, they're going to drop off. They won't be able to do it, even though they totally agree. And we have made it as easy as possible for them by giving them a detailed plan to follow. The reason they won't be able to follow it is because it's going to cost them a lot of energy to follow, because they have to pay attention to it. They have to think about it. They have to make it fit in their life. And right now, their life is arranged differently, and it doesn't mean a lot for them to actually follow what we're saying. It's just an additional sort of layer of activity they need to engage in. But suppose we take that same person and they've come back with a diagnosis from their doctor who tells them, listen, if you don't change what you're doing in 6 months, you're going to have serious medical problems. Okay, this is the wake-up call. Suddenly, what they're trying to get to, a healthy life so they can live long, means a lot more to them than just doing some physical activity. So they have recalculated everything, because now this is the emotional connection. So if we gave them any plan now, not just the one which we made things as easy as possible, we have one where they actually have to measure everything before they cook it. They have to use equipment and do very specific things. They're going to do it, because the cost of doing that is a lot less to them now than what they're actually trying to get to, because they're really, really afraid, in a bad place, right, in their particular situation. That applies to everything. A business grows when? When does it actually become innovative? Because innovation costs. It becomes innovative when its market share begins to drop, when its competitors begin to get ahead of it. And then the business begins to say, okay, we need to innovate now. We need to invest in new ideas, in new setups, in new approaches to marketing, in new products we need to bring to market. This truly only happens when what they're doing is not working well enough, and they can see the writing on the wall that if they continue down that path, at some point they're going to lose market share, they're going to shrink, they're going to lose money, they might have to lay people off, and potentially they could even go down. It's no different to us. We need to have the kind of connection in our head of the emotional value of where we are, what does it truly mean for us, and how we need to basically get to something better. But it can't be conceptual, as you said. You can think about motivation, you understand what you're talking about, you and everybody you talk to are very smart people. They will agree 100% with what you're saying, but they won't feel it. But if you reframe it in a way that you actually feel it, then the calculus changes. Then we're willing to undergo the stressor of exercise, or the stressor of staying up late and working through a night because a project is important, or the stressor of going to a presentation and talking to 1,000 people because what you're going to do for them is really important to you. So we have to tie, like Justin does, what we do to a sense of who we are. It becomes part of our identity. And Justin earlier mentioned how he structures his day. Okay, in order to do that, we again need to understand who we are and how the structure of our day essentially reflects part of what we do, part of how we operate, and essentially where we're heading towards. And if those things happen, and none of this is easy, I make it sound very easy because I'm sort of deconstructing it, I'm putting in layers, you think, okay, that sounds really cool. I know it isn't, because it costs us energy. If you sit down, if anybody of us sits down and tries to peel back the layers of who we are, look at the trauma we carry through our life, look at the insecurities we have, look at the fears we don't acknowledge, look at the uncertainty we're not very good at dealing with, and we put all those things together, they're very uncomfortable to deal with. But if we do that work, if we go through the discomfort, then we begin to understand that, hey, the activities I'm engaging in are going to mitigate the fears I feel, the insecurities I experience, the uncertainties I'm not very good at dealing with. And that basically reframes everything and allows us to recalculate the cost of what we do. This is the smart part of us. This is where we as humans actually can apply the intelligence we have to rewire some of the reactive, instinctive almost, reactions of our body and mind.
And you so beautifully set up a point that I wanted to talk about, because I realized you made a comment earlier I didn't address, and I'm going to do that now. And that was just such a great lead up to you. You said, well, how could, with this journey, how could we eventually use AI to augment or strengthen that? And a good example of that, Martin and I are always looking for new, quirky, awesome ways to just make these tools succeed. And during that journey, we discussed, like you were talking about, part of it that I used it personally was structuring my day to make it more efficient. I'm huge on efficiency. And two, to find any blind spots. Are there things I'm doing just through having a conversation with an AI? Are there things I'm doing that are redundant, that are potentially harmful, or are holding me back? And one of the things I found, so another thing that is well known about me is I love coffee. I'm a huge coffee drinker. I drink it all throughout the day. And, I've tried to kind of get a little more matcha in there. But anyway, so I drink coffee a lot, and I do have to cut myself off, because if not, I won't sleep. And so my normal routine was get up, get a cup of coffee, to get my day started. And I would have that 2 o'clock crash. And that's kind of a cliche joke, 2 o'clock, better get something to eat, a snack or something. But one, I was using Microsoft Copilot one time. And of course,
Mhm.
it was pulling sources in, and something interesting popped up, and it was about adenosine, which is a neurotransmitter. And what adenosine does is it
Mm.
really affects your sleep and relaxation. If it builds up and it doesn't release, then that's where you get a crash. Now, what I found is that in our brains, caffeine competes with adenosine. And so what happens is caffeine is much more effective at blocking adenosine than adenosine is at competing with caffeine. And so what happens is, for about the first hour and a half after you wake up, if you drink coffee within that window, what happens is the adenosine has not had time to go through your system yet. And so the caffeine blocks the receptors. And so if you drink that cup and it wears off throughout the day, one or two cups by 10 o'clock, the way your body breaks down everything, it just so happens about 2 o'clock that afternoon, you crash, because finally the adenosine is able to move through your system. And so what I started doing was, okay, I want my coffee, but I'm going to wait 2 hours or an hour and a half. I'm going to get up, do what I have to do. And when I get to work, I'll make my coffee. And so by then, it'll be about that hour and a half, 2 hours. And what I found is, after about a week or so, the 2 o'clock crashes went away. And honestly,
Mm.
much of my focus and my best time focusing and my most energetic time of the day now is that 1 to 2 to 3 o'clock window. And
I love
I
that.
don't think I would have ever found that if some, search I did through having that dialogue hadn't produced that in relation to coffee. And that was completely, AI. And
Yeah.
so, like you said, sometimes we just have, it's like the Donald Rumsfeld quote, where sometimes there's unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't
Yes.
know. And so these tools can help us develop that awareness, and then, in collaboration with the good sources or the professionals or the coach and the trainer, it just creates an even broader source of expert knowledge that I don't see, if used appropriately and correctly, how these tools aren't going to help us. I can see why people say we're going to live longer and fuller, more healthy lives, because with works like what you've put together in this book and the effective use of advanced tools like that, we can set ourselves up for becoming our healthiest, most successful, and most fulfilled versions of ourselves, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. And I love what you did. Essentially, yes. Okay, let's look at two things here. First of all, you used AI, and in order to do that, you had to have human input. And you asked it essentially to analyze the parts of your life, which is a system, which you can't see because you have emotional blind spots. And like you, I love coffee, right? And like you, I don't drink it first thing in the morning. I used to. Now, and what the AI does, because it doesn't have emotionality, is it looks at the structure and optimizes it in terms of how we could better manage our energy. Now, adenosine, for those who don't understand it, is part of a chemical which is used throughout the body and the brain to essentially power us at a cellular level. It's adenosine triphosphate. It's 3 elements of phosphate linked to one element, one molecule of adenosine. And everything we do, whether we think, whether we lift weights, whether we walk, whether we're going through a stressful moment in our life, uses ATP for short. Now, the breakdown of ATP is a complex interaction that requires a certain amount of hydrolysis. It uses up water, and the breaking down of those molecules release the energy in our system that powers it. And there's obviously a recycling effect, which is not 100%. So adenosine actually builds up. And it builds up and it builds up. And the moment it builds up, we experience the fatigue at the end of the day. When you say to me, oh, I'm too tired to do this. Physically, you're okay. I mean, mentally, you're okay. You're thinking, right? But what is this too tired to do this? Is a perceptual awareness of the adenosine buildup in our system, which allows us to make a calculation that, hey, you won't be able to go 100% in your thinking or 100% in your body. So you won't be able to walk 3-4 miles right now with ease. So you shouldn't be attempting it. Coffee, as you said, blocks the adenosine receptors, and it gives us a false sense of energy management because they've been blocked, but the effects of coffee are temporary. So when it wears out, then we have more adenosine in our system than we should, and then we need to drink another cup of coffee, another cup of coffee. So then we're caught in this sort of cycle where throughout the day you can have quite a significant number of cups of coffee. And you're talking to a guy who used to drink 10 cups of coffee a day. So I'm down to 2. I'm down to 2, right? So, and what that does essentially is it allows us to mismanage our energy resources, being active. We're being productive, no question about that. But when we get to bed at night, we have a lot of caffeine in our system, so the quality of our sleep is essentially affected. And this is important because the quality of our sleep is when the repair and building goes on, when learning becomes established in our head, and all those things. So essentially, by mismanaging our energy system, we were not functioning optimally. And by doing what you did, you still have the same amount of energy coming in each day. You pretty much have the same amount of energy going out every day. But because you managed it better, then you don't have energy bottlenecks. You don't have the peaks and drops that you would get normally. And that's what allows you to become better in your everyday life. But there are other effects to this, and what you said about living longer. This peak and trough which we hit when our energy levels drop, and then we need an injection, and then we sort of go 100%, then we drop again, and then another injection through another cup of coffee. That is also a stressor. It's a stressor to the brain, it's a stressor to the body. And stresses which are unnecessary, even though they may be small, cumulatively have an impact on us. And we're not 100% sure how that impact affects us. Perhaps it affects us in increased cortisol levels in the body. It affects us and we have increased cortisol levels in the body, then the body doesn't manage as well as it should its energy resources, fat deposits, how they're created, how they are sort of accessed is not as efficient. And we tend sometimes to put on weight when we're stressed, for sure. We know that we actually put on fat reserves as opposed to using them up, and we use up carbohydrates instead because the body goes into panic mode. So, just a tiny thing which you did, it's incredibly smart. You said, You laid out your plan, which was pretty good to begin with, right? Your energy management was pretty good because you're an effective human being and you've worked it out for yourself. But you took the emotionality, the emotional attachment you have to coffee out of the picture because the machine now doesn't understand that. And you asked it to optimize it for you, and it did. And here's the result. So you actually feel better, you function better, you don't have the crashes. 2 o'clock is one of your most productive times now because it used to be a dead hour. And I totally, I totally sort of feel for you because I used to have the same. I get about 2 o'clock, and I need a double espresso to get through it because I could feel my body shutting down, my brain not working. I'd be looking at something and I wouldn't be able to understand it. So I went from that, like you, to just working through it without feeling that I'm powering down. So yeah, that's really, really smart. And it's a classic example of how we can use the current tools we have to analyze things better. It's invaluable.
I want to talk about another aspect of your book and get your input is the importance of having a mission and purpose, because things happen in life and you're knocked off the horse and your mission that you had may have gone. And I'm kind of a big advocate of it's more important to get one than have the perfect one. And I think that relates to this book as well. I'm going to go here for the next 3 months. This is the purpose I'm going to pick, because I really believe, like Viktor Frankl talked about, man's search for meaning, who was in the concentration camps. We need to either invent or come up with a purpose, and that's a critical part of this engine, which I see as a great complement for your book. And I'd like you to talk about that, because some people are constantly looking for that purpose instead of just choosing one. This is what it'll be for
Yes.
now. And I think sometimes they need permission to just do that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing this up. And yeah, we're going to take everything from that high concept we just presented now to absolute basics and go back to what Justin said earlier about, doing things with a sense of motivation. You're right. Viktor Frankl is a classic example. He survived where others didn't in concentration camps during the Second World War. And afterwards, he analyzed it because he had developed a kind of self-awareness. And he said that essentially what made him pull through is the fact that he had a sense of hope, which gave meaning to what he actually did every day. And when we talk about things like hope, which are high sort of intellectual ideals, and meaning in our life, and again, we have all these ideas about it, at a base, physical and neurobiological level, they are represented by very specific situations that take place in our body that allows us to do something at a lower energetic cost and a better benefit to us. And I will explain all this now at a sort of a little bit plainer English so that we understand what we're talking about. Let's say we sort of we get into a situation of my earlier example, somebody agrees intellectually that they need to get fitter. We give them the perfect fitness plan. We have made it as easy as possible for them to do it in a particular situation, so there are no obstacles, and they get to it. And they start doing it because it's a beginning and they're excited, then the excitement fades off, and then they get bored, and then things happen, life is messy, and they stop because life is messy and they have to do other things, and they prioritize those things. And the reason they drop off, because it's important to be healthy in order to deal with everything, but the messiness of life, is because it doesn't mean a lot to them. And meaning essentially is something that is valuable to ourselves. And if it's valuable to ourselves, we understand why we do it. It's back to our who and our why. And there's no business that will not start with a clear who and a why. And that may change, but we need that for that clarity of perception that allows a business to operate differently and better than its competition, so it can become competitive. And the same thing goes for us. If we don't understand our who and our why, then everything we do is messy. It costs us more in terms of energy. It only confuses us, which takes up more energy. And we don't have infinite supplies of energy. At some point, we prioritize the things that we say are important. What's important? Pay the bills. Nobody will argue against that. Have food on your table. Again, nobody will argue against that. Look after your family. But yes, but why do those things have to exclude looking after yourself? Why do we have to do it at the cost of our own personal, mental, and physical health? The reason we go down that path is because we haven't got that clarity of thinking in our approach. And that clarity of thinking comes off again from our who and our why. Our why is a purpose, and it doesn't have to be a high and mighty purpose. It can be as simple as making sure my family are okay when so many things happen in the world around us and it's messy and potentially disruptive to being okay. So that changes all the time because we change who we are all the time. This is a constant process. But what doesn't change is the optimization of operation it actually can give us if we do it right. And we always have to work out, okay, why am I exercising? When I was competing, to use the example of myself, when I was competing in martial arts, the reason I exercised so much, I had a high power job and I would put in between 20 and 22 training hours a week. Okay, the reason I did that is because if I didn't do that, then I shouldn't be competing. Otherwise, I would go there, I wouldn't be ready, I would just be giving a fight away. So there's no point in that. So I was prepared to do that. When I stopped competing, that went away. And it took me a couple of years to work out my motivation after that for why do I train every day. And the reason I train every day now, emotionally for me, is that as I age, I don't want to lose the sense that I can control my body, I can enjoy it, I can enjoy the world around me, and that makes me feel happy. And I don't want that to go away because aging is inevitable, right? I'm getting older every single day. So I want to maintain that. And that really means a lot to me, that I can wake up in the morning and feel healthy and feel happy to be alive. I had to do a lot of work to get to this simple idea. Our motivation always comes down from the things that we value. If we value something and we truly want it because it has a lot of meaning for us, then we're prepared to do almost everything we can do to achieve it. And it doesn't matter what domain we're talking about. It can be business, it can be learning, it can be relationships, it can be life, it can be fitness. The equation is the same for all of them. So that's the approach, that's the work that has to be.
The great example is you had the competition, and then, of course, it stopped, and you realized I have to invent something new, and that's the key thing to understand. If the motivation's not there, then you need to get in action and make up what I call a game worth playing next. Is another way to put it.
Yeah,
What's the
yeah,
game worth
correct.
playing now in my life from here on? And I think that's equal important aspect. And this is related to something in studying meditation, which I want to talk about because you have it in the
Mm.
book, and I've done noble sits, and which almost killed me. 10 days silent for me is just it's a one of my it's a whole story in itself. But I survived it, and the thing is I studied a lot about meditation and how it gives us more of being in the moment, which uh, from all my research is the safest place to be in the
Mm.
moment. But I
Yes.
realized that for me, maybe for my Western mind, I need that purpose in life to be able to do the meditation and be present. When I've got both of those components, I'm working on the meditation and I have the purpose, then I seem to be able to be more in the moment. While when I study people have done massive meditation in India and other, they don't seem to need that. And it's okay to accept that's what we call your limitations. I need the purpose to be in the present. And I think that's compliments because I want to then talk a little bit about meditation, which is in this book too. But that idea, they go together. The purpose along with the meditation allows us to be more in the moment. And the truth is, in martial arts, I know, and so does Justin from his training, the safest place to be is here right now.
If I
Yeah.
can, before we
Yeah.
move on, because
Yeah.
there's a point, and David, as long as I've known you, I know we did another podcast about a year ago, and purpose has been something that's I've noticed is a common theme in your just philosophy, and it's great, and just something that I'm led to talk about before we switch over to meditation, too. That I know you mentioned in your book, but you notice and purpose nowadays, and especially in our society, a lot of people tie their purpose to their career, and it's the thing of what's the first thing you ask somebody, what do you do? It's not who are you, what do you like, what's your favorite food, it's what do you do, many times. And it again, I don't want to give too much of the book away, but you talk about
No,
cognition a
give
lot.
away the book. They'll still buy it. Don't worry.
you
Right, right,
you
David?
Absolutely,
you
absolutely, I agree.
you talk a lot about cognition and rewriting the brain, and I think sometimes you call it the hidden organ, and I think that's beautiful because we don't see our brain. It's not something we wash every day or we brush, and so we often kind of forget about it in a sense, and we forget that it's such an amazing thing because when you learn something new, you actually have neurons that are reaching out to each other and finding each other and creating new pathways. And for something as amazing as that, I saw this a lot growing up, and I've seen it working with trades, especially, is individuals who they spend their life, dedicate their life to learning a skill, and they create a career out of it, and then they finally retire, and they're as healthy as can be. I mean, you're talking about 60-year-olds that can outdo 20-year-olds, and within a year or two they've developed a disease, or they've passed away even. And it's
Mhm.
because they they felt that they lost themselves. And what was interesting is I've seen many plumbers, for example, who some stay at home and they literally waste away, and then others, even if they're not working for a living, they may do plumbing as an outreach with a church or a nonprofit organization, and they do that for 20 more years after they've
Mm.
retired, and they live much longer. And the only thing, it's not, I don't think it's as much the physical activity or the continual learning, like you said. I think it's they have a purpose that drives them, and that makes a
Yes,
huge difference. I just wanted to put that in there because you've done such a good job really pushing purpose as being a big, I don't think a lot of people think of purpose as a health standard, and it
absolutely.
really is. Thank you.
It is, and I'm so glad you brought this up. Okay, and I'm going to tie what you said down to meditation, and I'm going to talk about longevity. But before I do that, first of all, I want to thank you because essentially what you said is real. We've all experienced it at an observational level. People who are healthy and successful, they stop what they're doing, they lose themselves, and then they decline both physically and mentally, and their health sort of drops, and sometimes they pass away long before their time. We across the world, there are 5 blue zones. They're called blue zones because people in them live longer, and scientists have been obviously really interested in this. There's a lot of analysis, a lot of studies that have been carried out. And what is interesting is that in those blue zones, these 5 geographic areas across the world, one is in Okinawa Islands in Japan, the other one is in Ikaria in Greece, there's one in California, one is in Italy, which is Sardinia, and I can't remember the fifth one. But although they are culturally different, diverse, they have different traditions, different diets, different language, different foods they eat, different levels of physical activity. So when we study them, we find one defining element, which is a constant thread throughout those 5 blue zones. And the constant thread, because all the other things are different, so we sort of kind of normalize for them, but we can't see why the different levels of physical activity would contribute equally to living longer. It doesn't make any sense for us. The defining characteristic, which is probably the secret to all this, is that there's a strong feeling of community in those 5 blue zones. People feel they belong, and their socioeconomic conditions are not high. They're not really rich areas of the world, so you can't say, oh, they have it easy, and that's why. So they do experience stress, even at an advanced stage, like in a 70 or 80 or 90, as we do. But the thing is, because they belong to a community, we know from studies that by connecting to other people, we mitigate the negative effects of the stress response in the body. And chronic stress essentially is the silent killer. It affects us at an organic level, it affects us at a neurochemical level, it affects us at a cognitive level. And belonging to a community elevates what we do because we feel that we have purpose in life. It gives meaning to what we do. And then everything changes in how we perceive things. So there's a complexity here. The things we think, the things we feel, and then the things that happen to us, then the things we think and feel because of the things that happen to us, and how we color them and how we perceive them. And to sort of give a very simple example of this, suppose we are ill. We wake up in the morning, we pull the blinds back, sun is shining, birds are singing. We don't feel it the same way. Why? Because our body is struggling with some kind of illness. And it can be something as simple as a common cold. Energy resources are being allocated by the body to fight this off. We're not at our best. Our brain isn't working at full capacity because there's not sufficient available energy for it to do that. So our perception of the world is kind of gray, even though it can be a fantastic day. And the exact opposite. We can throw the blinds back on a day when we feel we've slept a lot, we feel great in our body, our brain is sharp in the morning. We throw the blinds back, and it can be a cloudy day, and we think it's glorious. We think the sky is alive with energy. The world is vibrant with life. And all that's changed is the available energy in our body to actually process the information we get from the sensory input of the outside world, and then create the picture in our mind, which allows us to put a value to what we see in the world, and then put a value of how we feel in that picture of the perception we have of the world. Belonging and being part of something and having meaning in everything we do, it doesn't matter how small and meaningless it may seem to an outsider, is an important element of our long-term survival. It's an important element of how we build our physical health, and it's crucial to our mental health and our psychological balance, which now takes us to meditation.
Before you do
We
it, I
have,
want to
yeah,
add one thing because of what Justin said. I love the example of the plumber that retired and then died, because there are several aspects in that. One, he had purpose and he was doing something,
yes,
but two, I guarantee he had community with the other coworkers.
Right.
And
yeah,
that
yes,
showcases what you said, because
yeah,
my own father, my mother wanted him to retire early, and I didn't, because he had all his friends, all his purpose, all his meaning at work. And she was mad
yes,
at me. And to this day, he retired as late as possible in the government as possible, had his heart attack almost 2 years to the day after that time period. So that's why I think the belonging fits in with that, and
mm,
purpose. And then the other thing, Justin, you've brought up with that is the importance of, okay, if you're going to retire, what are you going to do? And we have a good friend that retired, and I said, so what is your next game? That used to work with him, is you have to make a new one. And I think we need to educate people more. If you're focused in one field, you probably need to consider having some other purpose or connection to do. And as you know, I'm also working on a men's book. I think men are better at isolating and causing this problem intrinsically. That's why that's such a good point you brought up, Justin, is this is it. I mean, it's okay to be your business. Just if you're going to retire at some point, what are you going to do? And I love the story you said, Justin, of one guy helped out with the church. That's a good answer for him. He's a
mm,
plumber.
mm,
He wants to keep doing it. He could donate, and you saw how he lived longer. So that's such a relevant thing you brought up before we move to, of course,
it
purpose
is.
and being in the now by having a mission, and then meditation.
Right.
Yes,
And I'm gonna return the favor and set David up on this one
Okay.
because Martin, you're the heart attack story, and I'm interested with the meditation to see your take on this. Is I think sometimes meditation is really important because, and you talk about awareness in this book, because I think sometimes, I studied psychology in my undergrad and, even into my master's. And one thing that's always stuck with me is, a heart attack happens, and, it's happened to people close to me, and they say, well, I've I'm not exerting myself. I didn't feel stressed or anything, but when they really dug into it subconsciously, something that they weren't even aware of was stressing their body out. And that subconscious was what was calling the stressor to the body that eventually led to that heart attack. And they said, the more I reflect on it, the more I understand what led to this, the more I uncover. And it's almost as if leading up to that, if they had been in meditation, perhaps they could have identified that. And it could have been something, they might not have been able to, but I think if they had known themselves better, then
Hmm.
they could have been attuned through meditation better and possibly caught that subconscious feeling of stress or anxiety was harming them. What's your thought on that leading into this meditation?
I think it's 100% correct what you're saying. A lot of the times we're not consciously aware what stresses us out. We become conscious of it when we overreact to something simple because we haven't got the margin to analyze it properly and regulate our emotions and then come back with a response that actually is controlled. And it's only possible to see this in most cases in retrospect because we're not accustomed to sort of sounding out how we feel. We're not accustomed to asking ourselves, why do we feel this way? And trying to get to the root causes. So it's an important aspect. Adding to what Martin said earlier, before we get to the meditation part, loneliness is an epidemic that's across the world, especially in developed countries. And we have health figures now that show that feeling lonely, feeling cut off, is as bad for our health as smoking a packet of cigarettes a day. So if we think that smoking a packet of cigarettes a day, we're putting all these chemicals, exactly. So essentially, um, being connected, your father, who was a plumber, and also who was connected to the community, or a plumber who's connected to the community. They feel they're of service beyond their work. They feel that they're contributing, they feel that they're valuable. It gives value to who they are. It gives value to a sense of their identity. And those things are important when it comes to mitigating the effects of stress. Why? Because we tend to understand who we are and what we stand for. So then we deal with it better. So the conceptual things we build up throughout our life, which are on work and off work, essentially mitigate the impact of the harmfulness of the environment upon us at a cellular level. It allows us to manage our energy resources better. It allows us to manage the neurochemical storms inside us better. It allows us to manage how stress affects us, impairs our cells, so that we make better use of the energy system in our body, which is how we break down food and how we get blood sugars and how we get fat deposits. So all those things which can be optimized for us if we feel better in ourselves and our who and our why, a sense of purpose, the meaning in our life. If we take those things away, consciously we don't feel something has happened, but actually a lot has happened. It impacts us directly. It impacts at a physical level. We know that it can shorten life significantly. It impacts us at a cognitive level. We know it affects the brain and can lead to early dementia. It affects us at a psychological level because our responses go off. We also know the brains are very complex. But the only way, if we go off ourselves somewhere in a retreat for a year and we come back, I can guarantee you we're going to be very strange, simply because we don't have any other kind of contact with the outside world to calibrate our internal existence. So the way the brain remains healthy is by connecting to other brains, even this, what we're doing right here. If somebody could actually stick electrodes in our heads right now, this is what they would see through this conversation. Because we, all three of us, have almost the same understanding of the business world, and we have a common understanding of the physical world and the importance of what we're discussing, the electrochemical signature of our brains would be identical. It's like our brains have synced. And what has that done? Essentially, it has reduced the level of anxiety I feel inside me, and you feel inside you. And the anxiety would come from the fact that, oh, perhaps, I'll say something which they don't understand. They'll say something that I don't understand. I'm going to look stupid. Oh, they're going to, I'm going to make them look bad. So all those things go away. Suddenly we're all on the same page. Because we're on the same page, we can actually cover a lot of ground very quickly through this mental shorthand where we say something and immediately we all three understand what we meant. And this reinforces our internal value system, but at the same time, it makes us feel calm. It makes us feel like we belong in a world where we actually have a place, where we're actually being understood, we're being accepted, and we produce value, we get value back in response. Just through this simple conversation. I think the pandemic highlighted the fact that if we cut people off from people, they become a little bit weird. And when the pandemic ended, because we had almost 2 years of being locked in, human behavior became a bit strange, and still strange to this day. It hasn't quite recovered. We know that younger children who were cut off from school had these social interactions, their development has actually suffered. So developmental psychologists are still studying it, but they can see that that generation is a little bit behind in its understanding and development of social structures, social norms, how they should behave. But we see it in adults. They were cut off and suddenly they're back in society, and they don't quite sync. Their behavior is a little bit off. They overreact on small things. They tend to not be as well adapted and responsive as they used to be. And that comes from that massive stressor. And most of us, you talk to people, they have forgotten about it. Well, they haven't, but they don't want to deal with it. It's at the back of their brain. Subconsciously, it's stressing them out. And they're refusing to deal with the fact that, we went through that massive stressor. And who are we now, really? What is really important to us? And some people use the time to do their work and come out different people. They discovered new hobbies, they discovered new careers, they discovered new strengths they didn't know they had. They made new connections. So they've actually changed. Which brings us now to meditation. We know that people who meditate regularly have more gray matter in the frontal lobes of their brain than people who don't. So it's almost like people who go to the gym. What do they have? Well, as a rule, they have either bigger muscles, depending on what they do if they're lifting, or they have a better cardiovascular system, which means they have more capillaries throughout their body, which allow them to oxygenate as they do something. We don't see the brain, but if we meditate, that's exercise for the brain. More gray matter means what? It means slightly greater processing capacity. So we take something from the external world. Our brain, which takes almost a fifth of our body's energy needs every day, needs to use energy to process it, understand what it is, quantify it, understand is it a threat, an opportunity, or something which can be ignored, but it has to be quantified in that context, and then help us guide our behavior so we can navigate it correctly, whatever that thing is we're actually experiencing. If we meditate regularly, we have that greater capacity, which is why people who do meditate regularly appear to be calmer. It's the same way that people who go to the gym and lift weights don't get as tired if they're lifting up a suitcase, because they have bigger muscles and they have the capacity to lift the suitcase without actually feeling stressed. So meditation is truly important. We have this as many wrong ideas about it in the West, particularly, as we do about fitness. We think fitness is all about big muscles, having a six-pack, being lean, and it's none of those things, right? What is fitness? Fitness is feeling good in your body every day, feeling good in your brain every day, and doing what you need to do to continue feeling good in your brain and body every day. It's the same with meditation. We don't need to what you did was brutal. You cut yourself off from speaking for 10 days. Congrats to you. That takes enormous amount of concentration and focus to do it. And certainly it's like going to boot camp, right? If Justin and I went tomorrow to train with the Navy SEALs, they would crush us right on day one, and then we'd have another 9 days. It would be incredibly difficult. So you came out at the other end and you had differently wired some of your responses. But it can be something as little as meditating for a minute. It's just sitting silently and thinking about your brain. That's all it is. And then we know we equate meditation with no thinking, but the moment we shut our eyes, thoughts will come into our brain. It's inevitable. We need to be comfortable with that. And as we become more comfortable with that, then slowly fewer and fewer thoughts come into our brain. And we enjoy the silence, which for most people is uncomfortable. And that silence is that unique awareness of being in the moment without actually thinking about it. Thinking, what does it mean for me? Why should I, all those analytical thoughts which present other thoughts, which constantly have us chasing the proverbial rabbits in our brain. So getting into the habit of just simply being comfortable with who we are is a primary step to understanding better who we are, how we operate, what's important to us, what is meaningful, which then leads to better motivation, which leads to a lot of other things. So I highly recommend the habit. And it can be as little as just 1 minute. Like I said, use a timer on your phone, stay for a minute, just sit there silently and try not to think about anything, but don't actively try to suppress any thought. Just let your brain be free and be comfortable with that feeling. And that gradually brings that enhanced awareness, which then leads us to being capable of living in the moment and feeling alive in it, which is really, really important, as you say.
I've done what's called transcendental meditation, and it was life changing for me. And
Mm.
the 10-day was the big dive where I'm humbled by those that can do it. But I'd like to share my definition because I saw you're in the book, which is a really good starting place, and share mine because I think it complements it. Because I've studied this a very long time, it's been so critical. To quote one of my friends, when I meditate on a regular basis, it makes a profound difference in my life. That's why I stopped, which to me is the human condition. Okay, we must set up structures to keep going. But to me, meditation is the witnessing of our existence, not the clearing of our mind. And I think you're another aspect of Western is things you're going to sit there and just clear your mind. No, a yogi who's meditated for 35 years is going to do something like that. You're going to sit there and there's going to be a rush of noise coming through you. And your job is to detach from it gently and either go back to your breath or just observing your heartbeat or something. And I see meditation important to contrast with concentration because concentration is holding something tight. Meditation is more like bubbled up thought and then you gently come back to the breathing or whatever you're focusing on, like my mantra. Oh, I'm off on a daydream, come back to my mantra or breathing or something like that. And that's to me important because if you're a Westerner's never done this, it's going to be a noisy activity, and that's okay. And that's what people need to hear. Uh, it's not going to start easy. You'll start for a minute. You said 10 minutes. I'm going, most Westerners just let them do a minute to 5 minutes and just sit there and just witness your existence. And I will tell you, David, I've started it, and some other great things. Your book was timing, so a lot of health things I'm doing. But what happens when I'm doing it a lot is my intuition goes way up. I mean, almost
Mm.
creepy levels of
Mm.
intuition of people. Even when I was doing it the most, and this sounds really weird, but I'd walk over to a phone and pick it up before it rang, and I still know I can't win a lottery, but I mean wild stuff when I was really regimentally doing it. Well, picking up something else. So it's not just that mental brain. Maybe that's when that part of the brain activates. But your book is so great it started because it's just sit there and witness your existence. There's a lot of
Yeah,
noise going on and just don't
it is.
buy into it. And then you'll buy into it and let go of it. And then you'll buy into it, let go of it. And then you'll buy into it and let go. And that's okay. That's the meditation.
I love
Support
what you
both.
said.
Go ahead, Justin.
And to support both of y'all on that, there is also research out there. I don't have it right in front of me, but in studying cognition and how we think, there's research out there that states that knowing how you think, and again, meditation and what you're talking about, because Martin too, and I think it's when you're more aware and you have connections, like David said, you're in sync. If a friend of yours that calls roughly around the same time during the week or during the day, you're so aware of it that I think, like I said, subconsciously, it's about time for them to call. And so you pick up that phone and they call, you're just operating at a higher level. And the research out there supports that individuals who are much more aware of how they think and how they are effective and how they solve problems. What works for me best is many times, and I really need to find this, it was found that they actually solved problems even quicker than individuals who had a higher IQ than they did, because the
Yes.
understanding, it's almost like competence. I can figure this out, but if I'm already competent at figuring out similar problems, I'm going to adapt much quicker. And that goes back to, again, understanding awareness, understanding how your brain works, but then that meditation, again, like you said, more gray matter, especially in your frontal lobe, which a lot of that is delayed satisfaction, decision making, and things like that. So again, when that dopamine is not running your life, willpower's running your life, you're meditating, which is growing that area, and you're showing discipline, which is then again reinforcing all of that motivation, willpower, decision making, and delay in satisfaction. Then of course, I feel the research shows that you're going to be sharper, you're going to be able to, your predictive analysis, I'm gonna call the phone predictive analysis. And so your ability to predict and analyze things almost on a subconscious, like a subroutine, more so than stressing yourself to do it. I think that's, I've always called it firing on all cylinders. And it's like when an engine is just fine tuned, everything is working in unison. It just works so effectively that at, the
Mm.
press of the gas, it performs. And, David Martin, what y'all are talking about is really, when it kind of, I've always, a friend of mine's always talked about it as parts of a stool, mind, body, spirit. When all of those are sound, the stool stands. Without them, the stool falls. And so, that's kind of that concept of, and that's what I think of a lot of thought of the analogy in reading this book is when you are effectively working toward, securing all of those legs to the stool, it's going to operate much faster. And I really, there's really no lack of good things I can say about this book. And I told Martin earlier today, I've done my first preview of it, and I'm probably going to have more sticky notes and pages because this is one I'm going to read a few times and really soak in. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And Martin, intuition essentially is always there for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And intuition from a scientific point of view is what Justin just said. The brain is working on a predictive analysis. The brain's function is to be a predictive machine. That's what it does. And it does that so that it can allow us to understand what's coming. If we understand what's coming, we're better prepared for it. And if we're better prepared for it, we know how to act in order to survive. So basically, that's the primary function of the brain. It does that. However, because the predictions of the brain, especially at an intuitive level, are not primary, the secondary in the background, if there's a lot of noise in our head, then we miss our intuition because there's too much noise in our head. So if we have this clarity in our thinking where we understand the things we do, we have created the structures around us so that we don't get too stressed. If we do get too stressed, we have the coping mechanisms that allow us to mitigate their effect and regulate our responses. Then intuition arises and we begin to function at an optimal level. And essentially, it's better energy management. It's no different to what Justin does throughout his day. It's no different to what he did with his coffee intake. He manages the same energy that he had before, way better to achieve more with less effort. The brain works the same way. If we meditate, we don't have to meditate. We can have a mentor, a buddy we can go to and say, hey, you know what? I have this problem, and we just unload. And he tells us something, and we sort of feel better about it. We can have a confidant. We can have a best buddy, whatever it is that we actually put in place has the same effect. It dials down the anxiety in our brain. Anxiety from an fMRI perspective is the firing of all these different centers because we're agitated. They create an electrical storm in our brain that doesn't make a lot of sense. They give us a lot of conflicting emotions to deal with. Now, if we dial those things away, what are we left with? We're left with the sensory input of the external world, which is the problem we're facing, and the neurochemical response of our internal world, which is the solution we're seeking. And if those two are the only things that exist, then we are always capable to deal with the moment. We always have the resources, the smarts, to actually deal with whatever problem we have. Because our brain is a high functioning machine. It doesn't matter who we are. We all have the same brain with the same capabilities. So yeah, having that ability to just dial down the noise allows so many amazing things to emerge from the way that we actually work.
And the last thing I see both in you and this book, which is really important, is taking on something to master it and working with that, the anatomy of mastery being You work for a while, you hit plateaus, you keep going, and then something jumps. And I think that's, to me, infused not only in you personally, but in the book, but also in the aspect of picking these things and working with them for a long enough time to get that satisfaction that occurs through mastery. And with our world where we're going for quick satisfaction and we aren't allowing ourselves to struggle enough, I think that leads to more stress instead of less.
Yes.
Instead of picking
Yes.
something, your martial arts, I mean, that's a level of mastery you stuck with. So I think that's right in line with this book of, do you have some form of mastery you're going after? Something, even if you don't succeed, taking on singing or learning something new. Justin's always got some project on that he's doing. Uh, with his skills, he has so many, it might be hard to find something he knows nothing about to go into and learn, but I'm sure there's something. But that, I
Oh,
think, is
there's tons.
right, is a another aspect we need to include is, do you have something with the chance of failure and success you're sticking with long enough, with the potential of earning mastery, because that's it's a confidence builder, it's a satisfaction, and you can't get that from a quick hit looking at TikTok or something else.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about is being comfortable with discomfort. Every time we learn something new, and we all have experiences feeling, we get into it and we know nothing about it. And the first thing we feel is, oh, I don't really want to deal with this. Why? Because we feel stupid, first of all. We're looking at things we don't understand, and as adults, we don't like that feeling. And we're not sure how much of an effort it'll take to understand it. And then why do we continue? Because for us, at least, we have carried out that evaluation in our head that allows us to say, okay, you feel stupid and this is hard, but you know you're going to keep plugging away. It's going to make sense and it's going to be better. So we know that, okay, so internally, and that drives us. It's important for most people to develop that. It's important to be okay with feeling uncomfortable, which we tend to shy away from. It's okay to deal with, as you say, with things that don't work for us. We fail. Okay, so what? We're going to learn from that. But this is part of the identity we build up as we age, the layers we put in place. We always have two parts to our identity. One is what the world tells us to be, right? We grow up as children, we're given a name we haven't chosen, we live with people we haven't picked, and we do things that we are told to do. And the world tells us this is what it is. So this is the ascribed part of ourselves. And then as we become older, we apply all these different filters, which is the avowed part of our identity. This is the part we create for ourselves. And for a large part of the 20th century, for some people, those two parts were really inconsistent. We were one person here and a different person there. So there's always this constant fight inside us. And they weren't happy. They spent a lot of energy fighting inside themselves. They weren't healthy, even though they might be physically okay. So we're in a new century. We know that be yourself is the truest part of you. And learning to be okay with who you were when people told you, you are this and you're that and you should do that, is an important part of overcoming what these days we recognize as a psychological trauma of growing up. And we all have some kind of childhood trauma in some form, whether it's small or large. We need to acknowledge it. We need to sort of grow from it by accepting it, which is part of the healing process, and applying our own definition to it. So all these elements which you talk about, they're just that. It's basically being okay with things not working out, because you know the world is messy. You know nobody, no matter how smart they are, how cool they may be, or how strong they may be, mentally and physically, they can't do everything at once. Nobody can do everything just immediately. Nobody knows everything. Nobody can be good at everything. So it's all right to fail, and then be smart about it. Find the resources to help you succeed in what you failed at. What is it you need? Is it business? Do you need some help? Do you need to find a mentor? Do you need to find somebody who will work for your business and give you the analysis that you can't immediately get right now? Do you need to use AI tools which will help you operate more productively, smarter, with the same kind of resources? These are the things which make us better in the 21st century. What you said earlier, of course, about structure is important. If we don't create the structure which supports that kind of activity, we are unlikely to basically maintain it for any meaningful length of time. So this is where our own intelligence comes into play. We need to understand that essentially what allows us to do the things we do in a sustainable way, which also becomes sustaining for us, is the structure around them, which makes it easy to do. I mean, if Justin had to, I don't know, run 3 miles to get a cup of coffee before you get, that's really hard. He might do it on day 1, might do it on day 2, but day 3 is suffering, coffee withdrawal symptoms because it's too hard. And anybody in his shoes would feel the same way. But if a coffee machine is next to your workstation, right, coffee becomes so much easier. So this is putting structure in place for something you want to achieve. And it's no different to, learning things or exercising. I have a home gym since the pandemic. It's fully equipped. I don't need a lot of equipment. All I need is a 1 by 1 meter, 9 square meters or 9 square feet of space and 2 dumbbells. And I don't even need the dumbbells, to be honest. However, this is a difficult thing. And this is where I need a lot of equipment, because at the end of the day, when I'm mentally tired and physically, I go into the gym, and if I didn't have a lot of equipment, I'd have to work out something for myself to do, which I'm perfectly capable of, but it's tiring and I wouldn't want to do it. Whereas now, what do I do? I've had a really hard day. I had not enough sleep because something has to go somewhere sometimes, so you sacrifice something. And now I need to exercise. I get on a treadmill, and even if I don't feel like running, I can perfectly well walk for 90 minutes while watching a Netflix movie. So that now is a structure I've put in place where I will do something physical. Whereas before, if I didn't have that structure, I would have probably chosen not to do it. It would have been too difficult. I'd think, okay, now I need to work out what to do for 90 minutes, and I have to make myself do it for 90 minutes. The energetic cost, my perception of it, goes way higher. And the perception we have of things is what actually allows us to make the calculations. Some things in our life may never be as hard as we think they are, but we never know until we try them. But if we just allow the perception to guide us, sometimes we'll never try them. So that perception is also a barrier sometimes, and we need to be aware of it. So this is, putting those structures in place is always a smart solution to making things a little bit easier. And if we make them easier, then we're more likely to do them.
Great point to end on. Justin, any closing comments you want to add?
No, I completely agree, and not just from a health standpoint, but from just a processes and efficiency standpoint, it's the same. The structure and the different parts. It's everything that we do is a collection of pieces, and depending on how the system works the best, when all the pieces work in unison and as a symphony. Uh, Much like what Dave is talking about, whether it's your body, it's your mental, it's a production line, it really being able to apply that systemic or that systems thinking to it and understand the structure is really what allows you to be successful in anything.
David, as you know, I'm a huge advocate of structure over discipline because, you know, I have discipline to not eat cookies at night because there are none in my house. So,
I think
and
at this stage we can actually say that structure equals discipline. It's
yeah,
as simple as that,
That's true.
and that's really
great,
wise what
great
you've spoken
closing
about.
comment. Set up the structure to win. Excellent. Well, how can they get your book? Of course, it's on Amazon. I highly recommend it. Here's to make sure you see it there. Built to last, extremely well done, well indexed, pictures in it, some QR codes for other resources, and even a nice little piece on food. So you can start learning about nutrition, but not overdoing it. Just getting you on the treadmill so you can then go do some more research or chat with ChatGPT and learn something along the way.
Absolutely, yes, you can get it everywhere. It's on Amazon. It's on most bookshops. If it's not in your local bookshop, you can always order it. If you go on the website, you'll find where you can actually buy it. And if you're supporting your local bookshops, if you go to bookshop.org, you can basically order it from there and pick it up from your local bookshop, and it helps them as well.
I love that. Support local, shop local. Excellent, David. Always appreciate you and your friendship and Justin, this will complete our show until we come up with the next technology, and I think we'll be due soon for one on the next level of AI and how it's changing our culture, and how you can, as we say, learn to surf on the new ocean instead of be on a paddleboard and just let it push you around.
Thank you so much. I hugely enjoyed this, guys. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Likewise.